Thoughts? Richard?
Even in pandemic, I may like the word embrace even better than I did before, partly because I miss, especially during the first year when we couldn't hug our granddaughters because it just wasn't safe. I missed it mightily, but I hear embrace in a broader sense now, and I love the way Sarah has translated that, because it is a matter of putting arms around difference. And I love that very, very much. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for thinking about translation, I also thought embrace was beautiful and wonderful. I completely agree with that. And I think the other, I mean, there's several that I noticed. I'll just mention one that caught my ear as well. And that was the use of uncertain, I think, in place of weak, right? Am I understanding correctly? That I think captures nicely, I think, what's happening there. I think that's probably a more helpful translation for most audiences.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm making notes in the chat just so that I can, another way to rescue it. Elizabeth, go ahead. If you use if people can use the electronic reactions once we get moving, the Zoom now cues you in order, so I can know exactly the order people raise their hands. But you're good, Elizabeth. You can just unmute and go ahead.
Okay. I was just really moved by Kathy Maxwell's singing. And it was interesting because she sang a little bit more than is, treated as quoted, but she sang everything that was singable. And I've often thought, he sings into the song that he's quoting. And so I thought that's what you must have thought too.
I sort of kept going until it stopped itself, and that just sort of seemed to be the piece of it. I feel, I guess, more than anything else.
Is that right? So I didn't know that song you sang. I know we talked about this last week, but that's a song. That's an actual song in your traditions.
Well, I mean, not those words. The tune
okay.
is, and it starts out, it's the deep, deep love of Jesus. And I think when I read the depth of the riches, I couldn't get the tune out of my head, and so then it fit, and that's kind of how that happened.
You didn't even monkey with her words. It just fit.
No, it did. Yeah, it did.
Can you talk about their choice and how people have responded to that for God, the plural pronoun? Sarah? Or other people can respond on how they inhabited it.
I'm trying not to jump in too quick.
No, that's fine.
I liked hearing it.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
My ears need to hear it a lot more times. It's just still new to my ears. I have corrected too many students too many times for using, a plural pronoun with a grammatical single subject. I've just done that red line so many times that I'm probably going to have to hear it that many more times to get it out of there.
Jim, are you on this point?
Sure, I can.
Okay, good.
It occurs that they pronoun occurs a lot in the piece that I told, and especially when the bit about the sentence liberator executing sentence, and Janet and I were going on about this. How does this? I can't hear the word sentence other than as a usually it goes with a death sentence or years in jail or something like that. But their sentence added something a little bit different to to the hearing of that, or the telling of that. Like it was a little bit ambiguous what the sentence was. Was it, and I'm not a Greek scholar or anything, but I looked it up. The word sentence, or sorry, yeah, the word sentence in Greek is logon, or logos, and so it could be like matter or event or thing, but I guess in context it's I don't know, does anybody have anything to say on that? But I thought the use of the plural pronoun was good. I felt fine using it, and it gave the telling a little bit different flavor.
Kathy?
I thought a lot about it because I had several plural pronouns in mine as well. And I don't have much to say about Romans in particular, except to say that incorporating it in, I think, does capture part of the divine that we miss. And I think it's kind of cool to be right in the middle of a shift in language like that I think I've read about, and I push my students toward some shifts that have already happened. And I kind of feel like maybe we're in the middle of another shift. And Elizabeth, I agree with you, have corrected that many, many times in writing, but I think it's quite different, of course, when it's intentional. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciated the otherness of, or the unfamiliarity of it, I think. Thanks, Sarah.
Janet, did I bump Jim out of the room? Oh, no, there he is. I see him. He just moves so much. Marty.
I, of course, had mixed feelings about it. I learned it through the telling rather than through the hearing, and was surprised at how quickly it settled into place. That part worked for me. At the same time, I had the feeling that Paul, as a good Jewish monotheist, would have been appalled. And I wrestled with the fact that I don't know what Sarah's rationale was, but I actually was pretty sure I could reconstruction. If it wasn't your rationale, I nonetheless came up with one that worked. So that part was okay. But Sarah, you probably caught my section began with a quote from Psalm 19, in which it is not Holy One's word that goes out, but the heavens' words of praise for Holy One. And when I went to the Greek, by golly, that pronoun was plural in what Paul's quoting, but that's because he was quoting the Psalm, which is plural, in which it's not God's word, it's the heavens' word. And I made the executive decision that fit with what he had done in chapter 1 with his appeal to natural revelation, and that I ought to go back and make clear the Psalmic reference rather than shift it to a different speaker, which is what happened. So there were lots of different things going on in my response. But as I say, I was pretty sure I'm used to doing inclusive language stuff. I'm used to he, she, they as pronouns that individual persons use. But I thought, man, hit somebody with this who doesn't know what's going on, and they'll hear Trinity. And that, if we say that Scripture is where we get our faith, we ought not to rewrite it. I think I have really mixed feelings, because insofar as Scripture is liturgical language for the church, I think we are entitled to tune it up to match what we really believe. And there's another level at which I would rather we just be honest about I struggle even with other kinds of inclusive language on this point. Part of me would rather just leave it where it was and say, we hear differently now. So lots of different reactions, but it was fun to be prompted to those reflections. So thank you for that, Sarah.
Jason.
Yeah, I loved it. I take my hand down, lower hand. So like I think in Genesis, I've always wondered, like, let us make multiple. Now I get it, and I totally get, like, I'm not at Marty's level biblically scholarly at all. And I do think that like, what is up with Paul in Galatians? There's neither male and female. Is like he's getting rid of the gender binary there. I'm not saying Paul was saying my pronouns are they, them, but I'm just like, he already seems to be pushing this. And so just, I mean, it's just as somebody personally, like, I love this idea of hearing God as they, because the first time I heard God as she, I was just like, oh, that just opened up so many things in my own personal life. And I'm just imagining people I know who go by they need to hear God in their own pronoun. And so I love that piece of it, Sarah. It's a very powerful translation. Those are just my thoughts on it.
Janet.
So we're not hearing you, Janet.
You're still muted?
No, I don't think it's a mute thing, Janet. It might be your headphones, because you're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. We're trying not to do feedback loops. We've moved back into the same room together instead of separating. So, yeah, no, I enjoyed the they, and I'll for the reason of trying to grapple with the holisticness of this Godhead, and hearing so much of Romans all at once with the Holy One, the Liberator, Deliverer was in there, and that they brought it back together again as a unit. And I realized as I was listening to Jim practicing it, it also took away this, not just the separateness of the parts of God's reality, but it was like the turning of the prism, you know, or the gem, what facets I was seeing at what time that was being presented, holiness, liberator. So the they for me was a unifying thing, and I appreciated that. I'll just sneak in one other comment. I found the presentation of the grafting really fascinating and challenging. This notion of being put together, and especially the picture of the Jews being grafted back in you know, in these current times of such division, and the reality that, you know, you of being grafted together. Yeah, I thought that was that imagery is one I really hope to explore.
Megan?
Yeah, so I like they pronouns for God because I think it's the most fruitful one. I want to say that, like, we keep calling they a plural pronoun, but I think in common vernacular they has become a singular pronoun. It's the singular they. So I think to continue calling it the plural pronoun, because I think there's a difference between using they as a plural pronoun for God and using the singular they for God. So I have thoughts about if we're using they as a plural pronoun to imply plurality for God, or using they as a singular pronoun implying a non-binariness for God. I think the two are different. While they sound exactly the same on the ears, there's a difference between the two. And I heard it as a non-binary they rather than a plural they. And so I think the fun thing about using it for God is that God is supposed to have this like multiplicity of being. And I think that like God sort of blurs the line between the singular they and the plural they, which could be a very fun adventure. But I think to point out that they is both a singular and a plural pronoun at this point in common vernacular, I think is important to keep in mind. And also that, like, I don't believe anyone in the room uses they, them pronouns, but correct me if I am wrong. If no one in the room uses them, it becomes a thought experiment for us. And I want to be wary of making this a thought experiment with something that is people's lives. Would this be the same sort of conversation we'd be having if we were trying to shift the pronoun to she? Would the conversation look the same? So I just want to make sure that we're not turning people's lives and pronouns into a thought experiment in problematic ways. That is my piece. Thanks.
Elizabeth.
Okay, so on the whole topic of pronouns, which you excellent scholars have done a good job taking us deeply into, I approach this, I guess, from a pastoral perspective, right? So when the pronoun is they and there is a total inclusivity is what I'm sort of gleaning from what I'm hearing you talk about. But that in the portion of Sarah's translation that I was privileged to tell, it really struck me that this is holistic, that we're talking about what we say, what we hear. So, body, mind, heart, spirit, that it's all there. And I know that this is going to sound like romper room in this group, but it strikes me again, that words matter and that the content that's in our heart matters because it filters through what is said. And so that inclusivity, that wholeness, that think about what you feel, think about what you say. I loved that. And I love that the they is there. That happened later on past my telling. The other thing I would just like to share as a biblical storyteller was how much I enjoyed the blessing and challenge, and both of those things combined in learning this story. So I was intentional, everyone, and Sarah especially, of not dipping into the NRSV translation or any other translation. I wanted just pure Paul meets pure Sarah and blend those two and just see what happens when I mix that up and it comes through the teller, who is Elizabeth, who hears and speaks and thinks and feels. So I absolutely want to thank all of you, Sarah especially, for the blessing of this this unexpected challenge that it was for me, but perhaps for others as well. And this is going to be obvious as well, but to refer to Jesus as liberator is excellent. Absolutely. The one place where I stumbled in dipping into the story and learning it, what for me was righteousness, righteousness, righteousness. I was tripping over the word righteousness a lot, but then as I tripped over it, that was my signal to either slow down or try it again. So it was really fun and meaningful to have to do this with this translation. So those are my observations. Thanks, everybody.
Jim's hands up. But you're muted. Can't hear you.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to, can you mute?
Now
I'm hearing an echo, sorry. Yeah, I just, you can't just mute. Yeah, I was just wondering, I was just thinking of the all the different characters and different stories were woven into these chapters. And even in my little section, we had everything from Exodus, Pharaoh, an allusion to Abraham with the sands of the sea, and so many different stories that Paul weaves into these chapters, and it's reminds me of something of a woven piece of art where he keeps coming back to the different themes and hearing them echoed when in chapter 16 when Sarah was which Sarah was telling, and hearing things like kindred and children and different family members and things like that. And just the piece itself is just so rich. I think it was a good experience learning to tell this.
So Mark isn't the only interwoven tapestry. It's an article Joanna wrote.
Some of this is too interwoven. It's like, that the part that I stumbled with in practicing, not in telling, is the what ifs, and the different objects. That seems to be a bit of a run on, but I'm sure I wasn't the only. It seems like Paul has done this throughout this epistle.
Elizabeth, Melbourne.
Sorry. It's interesting to hear you talk about the characters and the stories, because that this is an expository piece. This is rhetoric. This is a speech. You guys are storytellers, and you're used to telling stories, and you were giving a speech. There were stories in it, and there is a story kind of it, and of him talking to the Romans. But it was interesting that it is a speech. The other thing is that I was amazed that your pacing was so similar to each other. It was as if you had a metronome. I mean, it seemed like to me that there was less disconnection from one person to the other than I thought. Sometimes when I've been hearing narratives, there's more, it's such a different style. But it seemed to me there was more homogeneity, not in a bad sense, but it was more continuity. Everybody was being the lawyer, and everyone was very carefully thinking of the argument on the one hand, on the other hand. There was a lot more, the text pulled out of you interpreters a lot of the same techniques, it seemed to me, which was good because it made it flow more than it might have flowed.
Cliff?
Yeah, I think my comments actually are building both on what Jim and Elizabeth have talked about. But yeah, I think this is a different genre than we've done sometimes. I know that the network for the epic telling has done things besides narrative, but I think we'll be presented with some of the challenges of doing non-narrative material in this epic telling. And part of that comes from the way characters are introduced, to use Jim's language. One of the things I noticed in Marty's telling was how she tried to give a different voice to the variety of prophets that were being quoted in her passage. And I think in my experience of telling letters and the non-narrative material, that's one of the most challenging things, is to figure out how to communicate in a natural and organic way to your audience when you're quoting material. And sometimes, and a lot of times here in the section we did this evening, Paul helps us, right, with for it is written or something like that. That's not always the case, but even when that's the case, it's really easy, I found, as a listener, to get lost in the sea of different quotations. You gotta have some way as a performer to signal and to mark those out and to help your audience navigate through those. And I thought Marty offered us one possibility, right? But I'm also thinking that's something we might want to help equip those who are participating in epic telling to wrestle with, and think about how they will deal with that quoted material and how they will help their audience navigate that when that's part of their section.
Richard?
Picking up on the notion of quoted material, there's a long tradition in the interpretation of Romans that involves figuring out how much is speech in character. The text is littered with haughty, There's lots of haughty, which is often translated as because, but it really, to my eye, most often functions as quote, and some of the divisive language that that exists in this would be worth a slow conversation, because there are places where Paul seems to be taking shots at the Jewish members of the community, and it reads better, I think, to my eye, if he is read as quoting the Gentile adherents to the community, as who believe certain things about their counterparts in the community. That would take a slow conversation, but I love the way Sarah's translation opens us to that. But that would be that'd be a good thing to have a slow conversation about before the epic telling, because absent that, there's divisive language here that gets more divisive if you know more. If indeed Paul is somehow or other linking the Jewish members of the community with Esau, that's fascinating, because Esau is the traditional progenitor of the Roman enemy. And that's a piece that I think we could do well to talk about slowly, just because.
Kathy?
Thanks, Richard. I started making notes about what you were saying, and now I have to remember what I was going to say. But I think in response to what Cliff was saying, and then also Sarah's question in the chat about, like, did this help? Did this cause me to think about Paul in a different way, or kind of hear Paul in a different way embodying it? I think I tend to often read Paul like he often sounds like he's just kind of harping. And I think it's because, as Cliff was pointing out, and maybe Jim, you're helping me think about this too, maybe it's because there's nobody else talking to Paul. Like in narrative, you've got the interaction between characters, and so one character might be harping on someone, but you don't get this for 16 chapters or whatever. So so I think that as I was hearing the story and seeing the story, or the text, the composition from all of you, I felt very much like we were just in a Zoom conversation, just us talking to each other and working things out and giving examples. And, Phil's got 500 quotations from the prophets, and, and here's another one, and here's another one, here's another one. And, that it felt more, I think, embodying it, not only me embodying it, but having it embodied in you all, helped me connect with Paul perhaps more than I had before. And I do think, speaking of characters, Elizabeth, that another thing that has helped me in thinking about Paul's rhetoric is to understand that for Paul, I think his audience is very much an absent character, but a character. And so part of my wrestling with Paul has been trying to figure out his, how do I think about his emotions toward the audience that he's speaking to? And I often find myself defaulting to mom, who is frustrated and, has little children in need of correction. And then I never know whether that's I'm going too far in that direction or not. But so anyway, those are sort of some disjointed thoughts, but the audience, I think, is an important character for Paul as he composes the letters, or as they compose letters. But also just having it embodied here made this feel a lot more like a discussion amongst informed peers.
Phil, I see you have your hand up. Thank you. I found myself with the one I worked on myself, I just really wanted to resist what I thought was really happening in the text. And I knew Sarah's book would allow me to do that to a certain extent, in a way that our normal way of thinking about it doesn't. But I just was appalled by the David quote. So I wanted to build on the full inclusion at the end, and let everything set up that's the surprise. And when he's just when he gets to, and keep their backs forever bent, it's just, I realized my understanding of God's sovereignty is so different than what I see unfolding before me. I would like Richard to help me see if maybe Paul and I have a little more kindredness than my gut instinct was saying. The other thing I was thinking is, I remember so in the seminar, to my recollection, we've done Pauline stuff once. We did Galatians about 12 years ago, maybe. And what I remember most about it was David did it as the person standing in the community speaking to the community. And Dennis did it as though he were transcribing it. He were speaking it to be transcribed. So his audience wasn't in the room, and he was able to be much more vicious when he wasn't having to look the people in the eyes. And so it seemed like we all opted more in the direction of you're speaking the letter to people who are actually hearing it rather than you're constructing it. But to me, that was a really interesting experience that one time that I told Dennis afterwards, I'm sorry, we're calling the other guy. Nice pastoral interview, but we're going with a guy who's not quite so upset with us. So random comments, but.
We did Philemon too, didn't we?
Maybe.
Yeah, that was the same. That was our first time, and
oh, it's the same, all in the same.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth Melvin.
Yeah, about the, I don't hear the harping, but I know what you mean. I imagine it, and it is just an imagination. I imagine it that Paul is talking to himself. He's trying to find, and he says, why has it happened that the Jews have rejected the Gentiles? Maybe it's this reason, or maybe it's this reason, or maybe it's this reason. And then he says, God only knows. And so he keeps piling reason on reason and reason because he never satisfies himself. He said, that's not really good reason. Well, how about another one? That's not really very good either. And he says, I give up. God knows why this is the case. So it's maybe it could be more kindred with that, Phil. Yeah. It's not harping. It's just he's trying to convince himself, and he can only convince himself that God does know.
I don't know if it was the intent of harping, but in my passage where Paul just gives rapid fire advice on what people should do, it's all nice advice, let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, and just blah, 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 blah. I'm like, after a while, I'm like, what is he doing here? That's what I'm doing in my mind. No one could take all this in at one time. And so, Kathy, I like your image of a mom or a dad just being like, just almost to their kids, this is how I want you to behave when you go to school or something like that. I don't think it was only effective if people could see it, read it, hear it over and over again, because it's just too much in one shot. So I kind of would love to know what was going on in his mind.
Yeah, I will say, Tim, I think you touched on just another way that that the epistles can be so much more challenging to tell the narrative, because I feel like it's harder to find the clues, right, to tell you what to do with that material, and maybe that gives a lot more freedom, right, to explore some different things. This is part of why I love doing it with students, is it forces them to think about things like structure and to kind of wrestle with something like a string of exhortations. It's hard to memorize, and then it's hard to figure out what to do with it. So yeah, I think this is just another thing that makes this material difficult. But I initially had raised my hand to comment on kind of the emotional tone that we've talked about, that we hear in Paul when we tell Paul, when we read Paul. And I think this is, again, this comes from working with my students. I think this is another place where we encounter the same phenomena that we encounter with Pharisees in narrative texts, that everyone's Pharisees kind of sound similar. And we're always trying to break them out of caricatures of the Pharisees when they're doing those narratives. The same thing I think happens with Paul. We've got like it's amazing how pervasive this caricature of Paul is across different people, and it comes out. And so one of the things I think that we have to really push ourselves to do is to experiment with different emotions. Right? And for me, it's helpful to have an emotion wheel, because I'm not very good about even identifying my own emotions, right? And kind of like try to figure out like what are some options. All right, let's try that to kind of break out of that rut. I think that it's so easy to get into when we are telling Paul. Right? Again, I think it might be similar to the rut we get into with Pharisees.
I put an emotion wheel up there. It's a really cool one because it actually has as many positive emotions as it does negative ones, which is really unusual. And it's designed for nonviolent trainings. I used it with Kathy's class, so that's why I had it on my desktop, just waiting for it. I was going to say that, like, reading Tom's piece cold was just really hard. I thought, thinking of the history of it was the Romans 13 be subject. Of course they're good. Just if you're getting beat up, then you must be the problem. Just seems like a really hard read to have credibility in the world I live in and observe, or maybe it's not in the world I live in, but the world other people. So I don't know if that's a piece that we might also struggle with, or if that'd just be tedious. Nathan.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how it was amazing how, like, at certain times I felt like I was following the argument. And then, and this has been my experience at other times trying to just translate Paul. So in some ways, like the question for Sarah, like, did you ever feel like you could follow the argument from 1:1 to 16? Like you're working with it, and then it's like, oh man. And maybe that's an interesting thought, because I did have that, when you were doing your piece there, Phil, on 13, 1 to 7, like there's got to be some shifts. Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, I know you've talked about Mark Nanis before too, but there's got to be some shifts, almost strategic shifts in there. Like I'm thinking around 13, and I really like James C. Scott's hidden transcripts, public transcripts, and in for politics. Are there coded languages in there? Are there hidden things because of power dynamics that Paul's able to communicate between the lines, because you can't just say it directly? Maybe that would help with some of the breaks where it's like, whoa, what just happened? Or I got to Tim's piece, and all of a sudden it was like, we were working with Kathy, and then it kind of like followed with, okay, now let's apply this to the body, and then all of a sudden this string of imperatives, and okay.
I think it would have helped it will help in the summer if we're able to do this, to be in a room together. I was watching David's, a videotape of David's performance of Philemon, and by shifting whom he's talking to, you can really follow the shifts. And I remember when we did Galatians with, what's his name? Another Tom, maybe? Remember that? When we were Celts, and I think that was that same Galatians time. It's a friend of Tom's who's also written a book that's
from Dayton.
Yeah, I can't think of his name. Anyway, he was with us one time, and he had some interesting things where he said, I think this part of the letter is being spoken to this audience and this group and here and this group and here, and we heard it differently if we remembered which audience we were. And so, like, playing with that, I think Zoom, you just can't do that in quite the same way, because there's just not a range of motion where people feel looked at. Let's go for 5 more minutes, and then we'll stop, because it's been a long night. And I wanted to say Fausto didn't leave us. He had a blackout. And so he kept trying to come back, and it just wouldn't work. So he said he's fascinated by it. He's looking at the translation with more care now, and he's never seen a letter performed, and so he was real intrigued by that experience. Or are we done? Oh, Sarah, yeah, you should have the last word, Sarah.
Well, I haven't kept entirely quiet because I've been commenting over in the side, but I appreciated about that telling, hearing those of you who did chapters 9 to 11, because I left them out, and I talk in the book about why I left them out. And I think there were times when I heard on different voices some of, like, you were able to give the sense of Paul arguing with himself and presenting those, different arguments, and maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I'm wrestling with the question of what happens to the Jews now, what happens to the people of Israel now, which I wasn't sure I had the time or the capacity to do in my interpretation of it through performance. So thank you for showing me that it's possible. And in answer to the question, yes, I did occasionally feel like I got a sense of what Paul was arguing about, and occasionally I had no idea. So there are bits where, and that sort of section going into 13, I found the way I blocked it to learn it, I kind of really focused on the transitional bits, so the end of chapter 12 going into 13, and that made different sense when I was really putting it together rather than those chapter and verse kind of segments. So that helped me to find meaning with the surrounding arguments, one leading into the next. So that was fun. I don't know what else, any other responses that I wanted to make, but thanks for that. That was fun hearing it on other voices and hearing, some of my language choices in other people's voices and how it works and how it doesn't, and filling that out. So thanks for having fun with it.
Could you say a little bit more about your experience with chapter 13 and how that pulled things together?
So gosh, that's I'll go back to my script. This is my actual thesis script with all my things on it. There was, so talking about, if your enemies are hungry, feed them, thirsty, give them something to drink. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. So it influenced how I expressed that. So that if you're feeding your enemies, if you're not being overcome by evil, you can let every person be subject to the governing authorities. Because I'm then going to explain what God, Holy One's relationship to the authorities is, which is outside, beyond, above, something like that. So it kind of, as I held the previous argument about, our response to each other, and I guess who has the last word if you're, in Paul's argument about Liberator having liberated us, then we can let people be subject to governing authorities, because actually the ultimate authority liberates us from them. Again, I mean, my explanation is as convoluted as Paul's. I apologize, but that's kind of what was going on for me.
I'm pretty sure Paul didn't always know where he was heading, so
I get that feeling.
Maybe you were really entering into his.
Yeah, I've been ruined.
And I messed that up a little bit in this one, because Tim and I talked, and I didn't go back to the text and look. He was saying the divisions, because the way I mapped out the divisions, there was an overlap where Tom and Tim both had like 10 verses in common, And so we
Oh.
broke it down kind of in the more traditional way, in the way we read it, experienced it tonight. That's why it didn't go from it. We'd lost that little connection you had.
That's all right.
So, but not that little connection, that interesting hook.
Yep.
Well, to remind you, the committee is Marty, Pam, Cliff, and myself. So when you wake up at 3 o'clock with an idea of what we should do, jot it down and send it to us, and then we'll throw that in the hopper and maybe do it. We will have it sounds like we're gonna have a more condensed time. So maybe we'll do, unless if somebody has something burning they wanna cover, we'll probably spend most of our time in Romans, I would say, if we only have a day and a half. Which means we'll probably do something with Tom's book in one of these online seminars, because I know he's going to want us to. He just proofed the galleys Wednesday before his heart incident, so which is good that he didn't have to do it afterwards.
If I could say a word, I am the seminar representative to the board for a little bit longer. And our new board chair wants reports from all the units in NBSI, about what our purpose is and what our commission is and what important work we've done in the past year and what we project for the coming year. And in order that Phil doesn't get stuck with me leaning on him to give me all that information, it would be interesting if any of you want to just email me, Marty Stussy, with comments about sessions we've done this year that you've especially liked, or projects that you thought were particularly important, or reminding me of what things you did. I think the board would like to hear about, all that stuff that members of the seminar did for the festival gathering and for workshops and stuff. So if you could help me get that information together, that will take a load off of Phil, who has done yeoman work organizing everything this year and carrying a whole lot of load individually that he probably shouldn't have had to carry. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
This is like in a general sense, but I'll just point you toward the let me find it and I can give you the link. Remember for the festival gathering, some of us volunteered to get together and just have a conversation about what the seminar meant in our lives. I can't remember who all was there, but there were like 5 or 6 of us. Well, that's in a global sense. I found it a really moving conversation, and it didn't have every voice, but that might give you some. That would be one of the pieces we did, but it would also be. It might provide context for the broader thing we were trying to do.
That's helpful.
Like
Thanks,
5
Phil.
of us. And I think I've gotten the impression from the board that they would like musings to reappear. They've missed, while they like these video features, musings they would like to see again. So if anyone has something that maybe we could even get 1 or 2 out before the festival gathering, and I might continue that role once I turn over the leadership to Cliff and the rest of the committee next year. This is my last, just to remind you. 17 years has turned out to be enough. And so, but I might continue that role so Cliff can nag you about the specific event stuff and I can nag you about musings. But if anyone has something they want to send me, either an idea or something already developed, remember you could have used it somewhere else, that would be lovely, and we can just send it to the network and they can either use it or not. All right.
Great.
Well, it's good to see you all. I hope you're well.
Good to see you all. Peace.
Bye.